Our gospel reading today starts, as Jesus walked along, he saw a man born blind. And his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Their question wasn't far off for the time. As medical, spiritual, and common knowledge of the era said, that people born with afflictions of any kind are born that way due to the sin of their parents. It's the unspoken rest of the story to those who would be reading the Old Testament or the New Testament. They would know that families seem to be cursed for generations because of the sins of a few. So the first word that Jesus speaks to answer this question is correct when he says simply, neither. Neither. It was neither the man's own sin nor his parents' wickedness that rendered him this way. Jesus seems to be saying to the disciples, sometimes things just happen. For me, personally, my mother is totally blind. She has retinitis pigmentosa, a disease that causes the detachment of the retina from the rest of the eye. Studies show that each year, 200,000 people across our country test positively for RP. However, just as a point of reference, it's also common knowledge that each year 350,000 people across Ohio alone win money in the lottery. So your odds are better at winning money in the Ohio lottery than they are being a carrier for RP. It just happened that both of my maternal grandparents were carriers, and so my mother won that jackpot, though I'm sure she would have preferred the Ohio lottery payoff. She, however, is not a carrier, and neither is my father, so my brothers and I are clear. Again, this has nothing to do with sin. It is merely genetics. So in some ways, Jesus' first answer, neither, is a scientific answer in the face of commonly held beliefs of the time. Neither. It is not sin that caused this to happen, nor the wickedness of the man's parents. The continuation of Jesus' response tends to be a bit more optimistic, making lemonade out of lemons. Jesus says he was born blind so that God's work might be revealed in him. But notice for a second what Jesus does not say. Jesus does not say, God made the man blind so that I can teach you a lesson now. Because that would be cruel to the man and leave us as disciples asking what kind of God would do such a thing to a poor, unsuspecting person. Instead, Jesus says that the man was born blind because things like this happen in the world. The man was born into a sinful, broken world where life is not perfect and where things go wrong. And in the face of this broken world, now, here is an opportunity for God's grace and mercy to shine forth as this man receives his sight. Think about it this way. We send our children to schools to be educated. And unfortunately, bullying happens. Scraps and fights occur on playgrounds, and life hands our children, as it hands us, surprises every single day. A child's skinned knee on the playground, however, does not mean that their parents do not love them. It means that their parents wanted them to grow and learn and sent them to school. And this, in turn, gives those parents the opportunity to show how much they care when the child returns home with a scraped knee, or they meet that child in the school office with a bruised sense of self and a scared view of the world. I look at this and I'm reminded that our hardships and our shortcomings are not maliciously given by God to make us struggle, but they are the effects of a broken world. A broken world that God gets to overcome by working through this brokenness in God's love and faithfulness and support to us each and every single day. For myself, growing up, every summer, my family would have a vacation and we would go to Camp Dogwood, a summer camp for the blind and visually impaired and their families that was located on Lake Norman outside of Charlotte, North Carolina. Camp Dogwood was one of the key backdrops of my childhood, even into my college years, where I had the privilege of working at Camp Dogwood for 4 summers. Experiences there made the stories of the New Testament, like the man born blind that we have heard today, or blind Bartimaeus, sound a little different to me because of the people that I knew and the communities that I grew up in and got to serve. See, there's this amazing group of campers who attend Camp Dogwood every year, sometime right around mid-July. They hire a bus and a driver and they come together. And they are called the Out of Sight Group. The group meets at a Baptist church in the basement on the other side of Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And because of this, they are one of the last groups to arrive their week to camp. See, they meet in the basement of this Baptist church and they want to stay for all of worship before they make the journey from Winston-Salem to Lake Norman. So they always leave late. But like clockwork, every year on their week, right around 3 p.m., their van would pull up and they would get off, all the members of the Out of Sight group. And they all wore matching purple t-shirts. And on the purple t-shirt in white letters was the simple phrase, "We walk by faith, not by sight." What a powerful, powerful phrase. We walk by faith, not by sight. These words have always had a strong impact on me because I've always associated them with the blind women and men who lived these words in a very, very real way, 365 days a year. We walk by faith, not by sight. Another reminder to me that our hardships and our shortcomings are not maliciously given by God to make us struggle, but they are the effects of a broken world. They are the effects of a broken world that God gets to overcome by working through and showing us God's love and support and faithfulness to us in so many various ways. And God has so many various ways to show us love and commitment and support and faithfulness. I'm reminded of the story of a man named John. John's earliest memories were of his mother, who he thought was the most godly person he had ever met. John's mother, despite her fragile health, devoted herself to nurturing him in religion and cultivating in him a religious soul. At her knee, John memorized Bible passages and hymns. Though she died when he was about 7, John later recalled her tearful prayers for him, said in his youth. After death, John alternated between boarding schools and life on the high seas, wanting to live a good life, but nonetheless falling deeper and deeper into the trappings of the seafaring lifestyle. Pressed into service in the Navy, he deserted his post, was captured, and after 2 days of suspense, John was flogged. His subsequent thoughts rotated somewhere in between murder and suicide. Quote, "I was capable of anything," end quote. He later recalled in a journal that he was writing. More voyages, dangers, toils, and snares followed. It was a life unrivaled in fiction. Then, on the night of March 9th, 1748, John, who was 23, was jolted awake by a brutal storm that descended too suddenly for the ship's crew to foresee. The next day, in great peril, he cried out to the Lord, later writing, quote, "That 10th of March is a day much remembered by me, and I have never suffered it to pass unnoticed since the year of 1748. The Lord came from on high and delivered me out of the deep waters." Unquote. The next several years saw slow, halting spiritual growth in John, but in the end, he became one of the most powerful evangelical preachers in British history. He was a foe of slavery and author of hundreds of hymns. One of his hymns was titled "Faith's Reward and Expectation," but you would know it better as the John Newton classic, "Amazing Grace." My mother loves that hymn. One day at church, someone in our congregation spoke up and said that they thought that "Amazing Grace" was rude because of the line, "I once was blind, but now I see," since there was a blind woman in the congregation, who was my mother. However, my mom stood up and said to the congregation, "That's silly. That's so silly. It's not rude at all. It doesn't worry me in the bit. Instead, it's kind of true, because I walk by faith, not by sight." May we all be so brave as to walk by faith and not by sight. Amen.